Welcome to the American Reformation Podcast. Tim Allman here. I pray the joy of Jesus is your strength. Wherever you're taking this in, we pray that love rests in your heart and that a compelling why for the mission of God. You, whether you're a pastor, leader, business leader, wherever you are, you're called to be a part of bringing love and light, the hope of the crucified and risen Jesus into the world by the power of the Holy Spirit. So today I get to hang out with a brother I just met. We've run in many of the same circles. Kirk Triplett is with us today, Reverend Doctor. He is the host of the Pastor Positive Mental Health Podcast. I think I'm going to be joining you here in a little bit, Kirk. That will be super fun. Thanks for returning the favor to me, though. He authored a book called Affirmed, Building the Positive Mental Health of your pastor. And we're going to get into a lot on mental health. I got a number of guests right now, Kirk. I mean, that's such a hot topic for us right now. So you're right. You're right at the crosshairs of a lot of what Satan is seeking to do, which is remove health, love, joy, peace, connection, deep relationship, attachment one to another today in the local church. And so I'm excited for this conversation. But our standard opening question, Kirk, is you look at the broad landscape, and you can tell a little bit of your story too, your time in Calvary Chapel. How are you praying for reformation in the American Christian Church, Kirk? Thanks for hanging out, man. How you doing?
Well, thanks so much for having me. It is an honor, and I'm humbled to be part of just what God's doing and then what you're doing. I'm excited. I mean, we've crossed paths at best practices and not really met each other, but now we will have to when we see each other. But anyway, so this is an interesting question. As I've been listening to your podcast, I'm like, man, this is something that is challenging. It's overwhelming when I look at it because, and I will give a little bit of background with Calvary Chapel. Again, I always have to say this: Calvary Chapel gave me a love for God's Word. And so, I really, really appreciate their time in my life. But what I found in Calvary Chapel was some of the challenges with what I call performance-based Christianity, which means your identity is determined by how much you're doing and how involved you are with the church. And I don't think it was ever necessarily intentional, but it became this kind of theme. I was in a church in the Southwest in Belen, New Mexico, south of Albuquerque, that was about 2,000 people. And, that's a different animal when you have that many people. But before we get into some of that, I think that the thing that I'm noticing with the church, and I hate to be so negative, and I think that's something that you're trying to do, is how can we be positive, but recognize some of the challenges of the church. I feel like the church is extremely distracted right now, which causes what I would say disconnection and then disillusionment. So I'm kind of moving to a book that I have in my brain right now that I'm going to be working on, and it causes the destruction of the church. And what I mean by distraction, I'm praying that people aren't distracted, that they would say, there's great things in this world. It's great to have kids. It's great that they're involved in sports. It's great that we have all these activities. Here we are in Southeast Idaho, and it's a gateway to all kinds of recreation and whatnot. And I find that people are distracted by those things. And so I'm praying that people would actually recognize that the most important thing in this life is Jesus Christ. And that they wouldn't be distracted by the things of this world. And we know this has been a problem since the inception of the church, even before the church. You look at the minor prophets. I mean, it's not anything new. But I feel like, especially since COVID and especially with technology, I just find that it is really difficult for people to see the value of connecting not only with Christ continually, but with his body continually. And so I'm praying for that, and I'm praying that they would understand their role, which is part of what I do, is their role in the health of the church. And so, as you know, many people come to church and they are consumers and not necessarily participants. And I like to say, everybody has value. God has placed everyone in the church, and he has something for them to do. And not that it's about vain repetition or doing certain things, but it's like he's gifted you specifically. So how can I help you find that? So I'm praying that people would say, man, I have value to the church. I'm a valuable part of this church. How can I help others and build one another up in love?
Hey, I love that. As I hear you talking about distraction, I think of communication and how a lot of the distraction today is keeping us, to use your words, consuming rather than communicating. And I think this is the next generation. I'm just finishing up The Anxious Generation. Have you taken a look at that book?
I haven't read it, but I've looked at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the rise in the mental health crisis, especially in Gen Z and Alpha too, and how does a church like create space for training and equipping people to have everyday conversations around the goodness and grace of God, and then really kind of put on, no matter what my vocation is, this is what I love about Lutheran theology, no matter what my vocation, age, stage of life is, I'm called to be an ambassador of reconciliation, a communicator of love and joy and peace, pointing people to Jesus as the author of everything that is good. And so, yeah, I mean, anything more to say to the connection and communication piece? I don't know that we're communicating deeply now. And I don't think it's hard. I think the Holy Spirit is like right there knocking on the door of our heart saying, hey, invite me in. Don't worry about what you're going to say. Like, just get up. We're watching the Olympics, right? Get up to that diving board. It's not going to be you doing that perfect triple sow cow. I don't think that's what they do anyway, but it's going to be me like communicating in and through you. Anything more to say about how distraction kind of numbs communication, depth in communication?
Yeah, what's interesting is that we are a generation of that is built. I mean, in the last 60 to 80 years, built homes right next to each other, but don't know our neighbors. And then we've been convinced, I think, that the value of relationship is really not that important. And yet I think and one of these days we're not going to talk about COVID. So I'm really excited about that. But one thing that COVID did prove is that isolation's not good, and that we actually crave and need the community of people and the connection of people. The challenge is we've been lied to and thought that we can have that connection virtually. And though that, I mean, like I have grandkids, young grandkids in Texas and then in California. And I love FaceTiming with them, but it's not the same.
That's right.
I think the church having, services online is valuable, but it's really not giving people what they need. And so I've looked at people streaming the church now. That's an advertisement piece for the church. It's an outreach. I mean, hey, take a look at who we are. But if you really want to experience what God intended, you've got to be together. And so the enemy has done a good job of convincing people that I have connection without really connecting. And so it's a false thing, social media. I don't care what people eat, to be honest with you, but they seem to want to let me know all the time. But that's not real connection. It's just nothing like face to face. It's hard to have a cigar and sit with your kids and really enjoy face to face time and just hanging out with them over the computer. So,
well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing like face to face. Jesus stepped in, touch and see, right? Yeah. Spirit doesn't have, and the face actually, this is brain science, the face knows the difference between a face in a screen and a face in real time, face to face. And so, we need deeper connection today. Well, let's get into your work on pastoral mental health and the role of the congregation in caring for pastors. Let me set it up this way. I mean, being a pastor, being a leader in the church, has probably never been more difficult. And I could tongue-in-cheek that a little bit. Every time has hard times because of the fall. But because of technology, pastors have become more of a personality, and people can kind of develop caricatures of who we really are, and then depth of relationship. Who can I really trust face-to-face? It's never been more necessary for me and all pastors to have a prayer team, whether it's elders, others that you're meeting with consistently, a father, mother, confessor that you're confessing your struggles to, who see you just as Tim, just as Kirk, and then locking arms. It's never been more important, I think, for pastors to say, I need the entire body of Christ. We are going to be dysfunctional. If this whole thing, rises and falls on me and my presence, my ministry, we are going to be less than effective. And so I think it's a great time for repentance for pastors to just humbly ask for help. And I think mental health comes knowing, and just speaking for Tim right now, mental health comes knowing that this whole thing doesn't rise and fall on me. One, it rises and falls on Christ and Him crucified, the work of the Holy Spirit through the body of Christ. And I'm one small piece. I'm a part of it, but I'm a small piece of God's big plan through our congregation. So that's kind of the setup for you talking about your Pastor Don character in your book. And yeah, let's get into it, buddy. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So, when I was with Calvary Chapel, I was assistant pastor at a large church. That's the second church I served at. And what I saw in the model, anyway, of leadership was what's called the Moses model. I know Calvary Chapel has adopted a second model, kind of caused some split in the church, and so there's two Calvary Chapel denominations. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. I mean, they are, if you look at what a denomination is, they are centered around an idea of distinctives, and so to be a Calvary Chapel, you have to agree to these distinctives. So to me, that's a denomination. Anyway. Sure. But what I saw was good friends of mine and pastors who were the solo pastor using this Moses model. And that was the idea, just in a nutshell, that they were the anointed one that God called to that church, and everything, as you just mentioned again, would rise and fall upon them. And so I saw this pressure. And then the challenge too, and this is just a side note, and I don't want to be disparaging, but when you get a bunch of guys who were ex-druggies and ex-hippies, and now you're putting them into leadership roles, sometimes there's some challenges that happen with that. Sometimes there's some great things, but there can be some challenges. And they were overall very negative about continuing education. And so, in fact, when I went back to school, my senior pastor questioned me about it. He goes, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, I really think I need to, because what's happening here," I had a friend of mine that, here's what I found. The pressure of the ministry and making every decision be their decision. I mean, you have guys, you have a church of 2,000 and a pastor proofreading the bulletin because he feels that much need to control what happens. And I get that we care for the church, and I get that we want to preserve her and we want to help her. But I just saw the weight start to crumble these guys, and many of them would have moral failings. And I think unintentionally, that was their way of escape. I don't think they cognitively said, okay, if I morally fail, I can at least get out of this pressure. I just think it was what happened. And so I saw this and I said, man, this is not good. And so I remember Jethro, right? Well, I don't remember him. I was up there, but he came to Moses and said, what you're doing is not good. And so that's what I saw. And so I really felt this desire in my heart to go back to school, to go to get my doctorate and help the church and organizational leadership and really look at it. And some surprising things came out of that, to be honest with you. One of the things that I was doing, and when we all go get our doctorates, whether you realize it or not, there's an agenda that drives you. You're not supposed to, but there is this bias and this agenda that drives you, and you need that. And my bias was, I need to tell church members that they need to step up and quit consuming and actually participate and help their pastors.
Like that.
Well, what's interesting as we get into Pastor Don is, as I interviewed pastors, and so just the nuts and bolts of it was, I was interviewing them to see how the actions of church members influence their positive mental health. And so there's 6 components of positive mental health: personal satisfaction, pro-social attitude, self-control, autonomy, problem solving, and interpersonal relationship skills. Dr. Luch Canute, if you want to look it up, 1999 made this scale. So that's kind of what I derived it from. Dr. Presho Bell from Duke Clergy Health Initiative and Dr. Chris Adams from Biola were very instrumental in directing me towards positive mental health. They are both leaders in our country for pastor mental health. And so Duke Clergy Health Initiative does a lot of great work. In fact, I've interviewed her on my podcast, and Chris Adams. Anyway, but the really good work on what they do. And so when I interviewed pastors, an interesting thing happened, is that I had one pastor that I was interviewing who, at the end of our hour-and-a-half conversation, as we're recounting how people have actually built their satisfaction, giving them optimism, and how people have made them want to actually reach out and be social with others, and how people make them feel like they are autonomous and can make decisions. And one pastor told me, he goes, Kirk, before we started this, he goes, I was about ready to quit. He goes, I had 2 elders leave the board. It was during COVID that I did all these interviews. He goes, it was a really tough time. He goes, but after doing this, he goes, I feel good and refreshed, and I'm ready to take this on. So I started watching the countenance of these pastors as I would interview them, and just see a lightness and a refreshment happen as they're really recognizing that not every part of ministry is negative and not everyone's out to get them. And so I took all that, finished up the doctorate, and I said, man, what am I going to do with this? And I got, within 3 weeks after my doctorate, I was asked to present at South Idaho Pastors Conference. So I did 6 sessions on that. I had the blessing of going to the Southern District All Workers Conference and presented, 5 sessions to them. I've been at Best Practices a couple times and done a local pastor conference here. But what I did was I looked at this. I said, well, what if you created a character? And so I made this fictitious character, Pastor Don. And I took all these guys, all of these men's experiences, and he's sitting in his office and he's ready to quit the ministry. He's been in the ministry over 20 years, but he is just down and discouraged, and he's sitting there. And then the Holy Spirit starts reminding him of these instances and those things that he remembered were actually examples that I took from those pastors that I interviewed. And what's great is, when you really drill it down, it's not complicated. I find pastors to be I am one, so I can say this, but very simple. I don't think it's hard to encourage us, but I think it takes intentionality. And so the little book that I wrote is really for church members and leaders in the church. To say, what are some simple things that I can do? How can I how can I affirm my pastor? How can those things, how can I give them personal satisfaction? Some of that is engagement. The little thing about engagement is, you actually drag your kids to church consistently. That's a big deal to a pastor. When you see a family coming and they make it a priority, or someone's there for several months and they're like, man, I want to serve. Is there something I can do? I'll pass out bulletins. I'll pick up trash, or whatever. And that's just the little bit of engagement. And then, how do you know your pastor? That's a lot of things as we can probably get into it a little bit more as we look at the mental health aspect of it. But pastors often feel isolated and alone because church members, I think, are hesitant to go, man, what do you like to do? Do we have anything in common? And how can we do that together? And then there's conflict. Self-control has to deal with how one regulates their emotions. And so out of that, just on a side note, out of that, the themes that arose from my interviews were their stress relief and conflict relief. And then the interesting thing that I thought was amazing when I was talking about self-control and these stress factors and these conflict relief factors is that encouragement rose to the top. When there was a church member that was reasonable, or someone that came alongside the pastor and said, that was a rough transaction, we want to know that we're here for you, let's work this out. Almost every time when a pastor would mention something like that, they would use this word, and that was very encouraging. And it's interesting to me because we look at stressful situations and conflict within the church, and I think the furthest thing from our mind is encouragement coming out of it. But the reality is those are those moments where I think it's easier for pastors to recognize, wow, that really was beneficial to me, that somebody came and did that. And so anyway, we can talk, I can go on and on about that, but I don't want to read my whole book to you. But that's kind of where this Pastor Don came from. And I just really love trying to encourage pastors, and when I do the seminars for them, and if you want to reach out to me, which we'll get to at the end, I'll give you the tool. The tool works better if you've gone through some of my sessions, because then you can go through it and it's just an assessment that you can go, where's my positive mental health at? Well, and it's reflecting, and we'll talk about that. You have about some care for pastors. Yeah. We'll talk about it.
Hey, so Kirk, this is awesome. And just speaking as a pastor, we're recording this on a Monday. Yesterday was Sunday. I got to preach, and it was actually my birthday, so that was cool. And walking into the, and it happens every 7 some years, right? It happens to be on a Sunday, but like the little thing of walking in and the choir is rehearsing at 7:00, getting ready for our 7:30 service, and they immediately stopped and sang happy birthday. And I'm not like I'm a words guy for sure, but it was just like, wow, I didn't expect that. And then there were a number of different conversations just throughout the day, finished with a voters meeting that went really, really great after our 4 services, and just the kindness of God's people, the care. And I love that you said, hey, showing up for worship, like it's not just that, oh, we want our churches to be full. Like, pastors got into this because they really think the word of God could change people's lives, right? Yeah. And that the forgiveness of sins through the sacrament is like a really, really big deal. So for families to take that seriously, for pastors to have an army of people who are starting to serve right alongside them. And then I'd add a third one, and this is our simple discipleship, right? Worship, small group, serve, like that you're connected to other people. That the biggest struggle for me, and again, you mentioned congregations of about 2,000. That's Christ Greenfield, where I get to serve. And there's a number of different pastors, hundreds of leaders serving, and we're trying to stay connected to God's people. But the biggest gut punch is like when someone that I was close to, and I only have the capacity really to know deeply about 100 people, right? That's why church size caps out at about 100. Someone who was like just maybe on the outside of that 100 that I don't mentally like notice, hey, it's been a couple months, and then they reach out and, man, I just walked through a divorce, or man, something just happened with my kids, or man, somebody treated me poorly and you didn't notice, Pastor. It's like a gut punch, man. I really take that seriously. Well, they weren't in a small group. They excluded themselves from that. So it's like, it's so, but we regardless of the size of the congregation, I mean, pastors are in this because we love Jesus. We love people. We want people to know the love of Jesus. It's as simple as that. And when you're encouraged by people who say, you know what, that's happening here, not just from you, but through you and the leaders that you're raising up, I see Jesus here. Anything more to say to that, Kirk?
Yeah. So I think one thing. So when I was in Calvary Chapel, I was in a church of 2,000, and now I'm in the smaller church in which we can talk about if you want. I love the LCMS doctrine. That's really what it was. The sacraments. It was sacraments and end times that drew me to LCMS theology. In fact, just on a side note, I remember sitting there playing some music as the pastor is giving the words of institution, and I'm like, why are we doing this if all we're doing is giving a nod to Jesus and saying thanks? And that was kind of the Holy Spirit going, hey, I want you to study this a little bit more. And then with baptism, it's like, man, I would just watch as people are getting baptized. I'm like, God's doing something here. This is not me saying I'm taking my next step and I'm going to be serious about my relationship with Christ now. There was something. And so I just started studying it. And then I would, on a side note, I was so, we would do, in Calvary Chapel, we would do, New Year's Eve services and have a prophecy update. And I sat through like 17 of those. And I remember, I think it was the 16th one, sitting there listening. And I'm like, man, this is the same as last year. And then this came to me clearly. I said, we are spending so much time looking for the Antichrist that we're missing the real Christ. And so, so that was my journey. And so I came to this church. My first Sunday, there were 19 people here, and I'm going to speak to this here. And now, we're if everyone would, as one friend of mine says, if everyone would screw up and show up, we'd have, about 100, and we wouldn't know what to do with everybody, right? But we're yesterday we had 68, and we baptized 3 people. Hey, had a voters meeting like you to paint the church, and it was unanimous, which was a big thing. And then a gal told me at our study last night, because I want to be baptized too. So this will be 9 baptisms in 8 weeks, so you're just going,
praise God, man.
What's God doing? And it's exciting. But the challenge is, as we grow, that capacity that you're talking about, is I can't get to know everybody the way I would like to. And some of it is, okay, you have everyone who sneaks in the back, even at a small church. You see them at the end, right at the beginning of service, come in and they leave quickly. And you can't, you try to run with your robe as fast as you can down the aisle to get them. But the reality is what you mentioned is really important. First of all, the two things you mentioned, what we do as pastors, we consider a sacred calling. And we lead with our heart. And that's a challenge with pastors because many pastors have gotten burned. And I want to encourage pastors, just because your heart has been stepped on, don't quit leading with your heart. God is the keeper of your heart. He's taking care of you. And so don't let that be cause for withdrawing. Secondly, it's a sacred calling and we are relational. And we want to know people, but that person who says, hey, I was going through divorce and you didn't even notice. And you're like, yeah, but you weren't involved in this, but yet it was still a gut punch. The problem is with that is that there's an expectation that every person has for their pastors. And so I call it, unrealistic expectations. I would say ambiguous expectations. And the reality is that we have these expectations on our pastors as church members, and we don't really realize they're there until they don't meet those expectations. And then we're emotional, right? I was going through this divorce and you didn't say anything. I'm just using your example. And they, because they're in the middle of that raw emotion, they can't pause and go, well, was this a realistic expectation for my pastor to actually know? Because nobody knew. And like I've had pastors talk to me who people were in the hospital. And then they got home and then they were upset at the pastor who never came and saw them because nobody told them that they were in the hospital. Right. And so this is an unfair expectation, right? And it's unrealistic. But when you're emotional as a church member and you're feeling that hurt and that almost betrayal or whatnot, you can't pause and think and go, wait a second. This actually wasn't a realistic expectation. It would have been nice, but what did I do to create relationship with the pastor that he would know what's going on with me? So it is hard, but pastors, to your point, gut punch, right? It hurts. Yeah. And there's some other challenges there, which we can talk about in a minute.
Well, let's get into what is on your sheet. Question number 4, Kirk. We'll come back to the other one, but what would surprise though the average, because I think we want to build, your book is trying to build kind of empathy for the call of leading in the church, right? Sure. What would surprise the average church member about what their pastor does and or emotionally carries in his ministry?
Yeah. So years ago, I kind of just was talking to another pastor about, people coming into your office. I'm like, yeah, and they just kind of spiritually and emotionally vomit all over you. And then they leave feeling better because, when you're sick and you puke, you feel a little better for a while, right? It's like, awesome. That's great. And they leave, but yet you're covered in it. And so you go home, and often what that does in the life of a pastor is it creates a sense of failure. To what you mentioned. I think that when church members fail to thrive, and there's different levels of that, but even when church members just seem to go through the motions and they're just there and you don't see that growth, that you can feel like a failure as a pastor. When they don't listen to you, you feel like a failure as a pastor, or they struggle, right? I look at the Apostle John, and what does he call the people in his letters in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John? He calls them little children all the time. He loved them and he wanted to be with them and he wanted to care for them and he wanted to protect them. And so when they don't seem protected or they don't seem to thrive or they struggle, I don't like it when my kids struggled when I was raising them, and so I felt like a failure because I couldn't protect them from that. And we take everything personally. And so I think that a lot of times church members think that pastors just show up on Sunday mornings and they're always happy and they're always positive and they're in a great mood. They're preaching about Jesus and then that's how they are all the time. And so I think that some of the challenges that we have is that people just don't understand that we carry all of the burdens of the church, and it goes to greater extent than what I think they see on a Sunday morning, because they don't deal with all of those things that we deal with.
No, that's good. So let's talk about mental health.
Yeah.
Talk about how are we thriving? I know COVID did a number to it. If you've got any kind of good news in terms of current trends in pastoral mental health, to share that first. But yeah, let's dig into a little bit of data.
Yeah, there's some good trends. And I would say there's no hard data yet on these trends. It's just me being in the field a little bit, watching observation. Because I know Barn is always working on stuff, and I know that we'll see some stuff coming up, but you need some historical data. You got to have time to make it a valid study. But I think what we're seeing is awareness. I think again, what there was always already this awareness, and I get all my generations mixed up, but the younger kids, the 20-somethings, there's an awareness of mental health. And there was before COVID that, hey, I'm not all that. I need help. In fact, it's interesting. Someone in their 20s has no problem telling you that they went to a therapist or a counselor this week. And it's just like part of their lives. And so I'm really excited about that there's awareness coming on. I mean, I'm proud of our denomination, our synod on our convention last year. One of the resolutions was about mental health for pastors and church workers, and how we need to be more proactive. So at least it's on the radar. Let's just put it that way. Also, I think the recognition that mental and here's the thing. Okay. 20 years ago, in order to be mentally healthy, the World Health Organization said that you had to be free of stress, anxiety, or depression. And they would say about 20 years ago, and really about 12 years ago is when it started to shift, but they would say that you can't have both positive mental health and negative mental health at the same time. Well, studies show actually you do have them at the same time, and building your positive mental health combats the negative mental health. And so I think there's just greater awareness, recognition of it. I think there's also what I'm seeing, which is great, is a lot more resources becoming available. And people willing to reach out to those resources. The challenge we're really having in pastoral ministry is, and I hate to do this, but it's true, is the age gap. So I told you that I presented to the Southern District, and we did about 95 pastors and church workers, mostly pastors of all ages. And you could just see, I wore my collar because I'm like, hey, I think some guys won't listen to me if I don't, so let me be respectful. And so I did to present, and actually I found out from the president that was a good call, and so thank the Lord for that. But you could tell that there's certain guys of a certain age, and I would say 55 or older, they really resist this whole idea. And some of the challenges, my presentation is front loaded with some clinical terms. I go through burnout, I go through what positive mental health is. And so you can just see, and some of them have been in ministry for so long, and they have felt isolated for so long, and they have just put their head down and looked forward and just grunted through it. And then you see, guys, I mean, I'm not that young. I'll be 53 on Friday. So, happy birthday to both of us. August is the best month to be born. All the good looking guys are born in August. Anyway, and so we look at that, and guys my age, and I would say, 35 to 60, they want to embrace it, but there's still some, some struggle. Seminaries have failed, and so I'm hoping seminaries are going to include this a little bit more. And then you see the younger guys eat it up. I love this. This is so good. I need this. And so I think it's some good news. I think there's a trend. Of course, not as fast as maybe you or I want. I would love to see every district have a guy like me, on their call, so that they could say, hey, we're gonna do these things at every single conference we have. We're gonna send these guys, and they're gonna have that piece. That would be my heart. But I think we'll get there. I think we're gonna get there.
So Kirk, it's fascinating. have any kind of hypothesis on why guys older than 55 are really struggling with this? Is it kind of like and maybe there's some parallels if you've listened to me at all to talk about the residential seminary kind of being the gold standard. Maybe it's the kind of like thinking that, well, this worked for me. We didn't prioritize any of this. This is soft. I did seminary education. I just gritted my teeth and kind of grinded through, the isolation. This is just a part of picking up your cross and following after Jesus. It worked for me. What's wrong with you guys? Is that a fair caricature of those over 55? Maybe a little uncharitable, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you're onto something, but I think there's another side to it. I think there's the other side to it is like, I wish I would have known that this before, and they're hiding that because I think that there's some deep hurts that these guys carry, and so I think the hypothesis is, and I will say that the denomination I came out of before LCMS really was anti-psychology. And what's great is when my interview with Dr. Chris Adams, who is a psychologist, and at Biola, he heads Rosemead psychology department there, does a lot with flourishing in ministry is what it's called there. And I said, what do you say to people? He goes, well, not all psychology is good. He goes, I agree with that. He goes, not all doctors are great either. He goes, you need to really be careful and watchful. But I always look at it as we have no problem. I get a broken leg, I'm going to the ER. I've had like several surgeries on joints because I haven't been kind to my body. And it's like, I need those doctors who know what they're doing to care for me, and I need to trust them. And I think the same happens with our mental state. We are fragile, broken creatures. Yes, redeemed by Christ. And so those older people would say, well, Christ is enough, because a lot of what I do is say, how do we look at what church members are doing? And they say things, well, I don't need to look at church members. And I'm like, well, but Paul talked about, Stephanus and Fortunatus and Achaicus, and one that I can't say that begins with one, and how he says they refreshed my spirit. And he goes, and I look at you and what you're doing, and I'm encouraged. And I'm like, why can't we see that God's put us together for that? And so I think there's that is my hypothesis. The second hypothesis is they've had nowhere to turn for the hurts that have happened to them in the church, and so they have felt siloed for so many years. That they just can't think outside of it, and they play the martyr unintentionally. But this is just who I am, and Christ has to be enough. And if they can voice that to me, I can walk them through that and say, yeah, Christ is enough, but Christ has given you, just like He's given you to the church, He's given the church to you. And so, So I mean, I think ministry's been hard. This topic has been abused. I'd say, mental health is a hot topic today. It's a phrase that can be interpreted so many different ways, and it can also be used too often as a crutch for bad behavior. And so I think that older guys look at that and go, well, I don't want to, because people just now that's their identity and they label themselves, and so they don't try to be better. And so I think that there's that tension that goes on there. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it's really good.
Yep.
3 C's. I love alliteration. Let's keep it simple. Simple, guys. So Christ at the center. Christ moves us into community.
Yep.
And then Christ moves us into a confessing and absolving relationship one to another. And so if whatever stage you're at, Pastor, if you can say, yes, it's all about Christ, Holy Spirit in and through me. He's embedded me with not just a congregation, but fellow pastors who can care, peers, those that mentor, but also just peers, those that can kind of empathize with it. Yeah. I have an accountability partner, Zach Zender, Red Letter Challenge, dude out of King of Kings, right? He and I talk weekly, every other week. And it's just like, well, here's the stuff, family, ministry. You got to have that. I don't think a lot of pastors have that. No. By the way, that's a beautiful place. And then if there's sin that needs to be confessed, whether it's personal or it's just like, it's a thought that I had that just is not helpful for me as I look to connect maybe with younger generations and connect and preach to the growing mental health crisis today. I'll confess it. And we always receive the forgiveness of Jesus. And then, hey, old men will dream new dreams, right? And there's never in the economy of Christ, in the kingdom of Jesus, there's never this set, I am the way I am. I'm constantly being changed, right? It's the metanoia, a mindset above where Christ is. And so pastors of all ages can say, I used to believe this. How powerful is this for a young leader, right? I used to think this is true. And now I've come by the Spirit's power, connected to the Word, connected to just how the world has changed. I was closed. And I confess that, and I'm learning new things. Yeah. How cool is it for like a younger leader to like draw near to a man like that confesses like that? Anything more to say to that, Kirk?
No, and I think for young pastors, that's really important that they see that in. I mean, the more I know, the less I know. I mean, that's the reality. Sure. I sit there and I go, man, there's so much more to the I'm going to use some weird terms. That's okay. But to the human experience and what we on this journey that we're on. I mean, things that I cared about when I was younger, I'm like, not that big of a deal. That's right. I had one pastor who said, someone was asking him, how come all of his early messages aren't available to listen? And he goes, I said some things back then I don't think I agree with anymore. And I'm like, oh, that was wise. But young pastors, in fact, if you look at the rate of young pastors quitting is actually higher than older pastors. Mm-hmm. And the rate within the first 5 years of men leaving the ministry is astounding, and it's changing a little bit. So I don't want to give a fixed number on it, but there's a trend that's surprising. And the reason is because they can go, I mean, if you're in your mid 20s, late 20s, like, I got plenty of time to redefine myself. I can do something else. You have these old guys who are stuck. Right. I mean, I know a pastor who's been in ministry for 23 years. He's like, I really don't want to do this anymore. He goes, but who looks at a job resume and sees 23 years in one place as a pastor in the world and values that? He goes, so I'm stuck. And so now you have a pastor who's ineffective. But if you have a pastor like you mentioned, who's learning and I love hanging out with younger guys. And I'm not very mature. That's just the reality of it. I was raised by a man who was an awesome man. Thank the Lord he's still alive, but he was a middle school vice principal. And so my whole life, everything that middle schoolers do cracks me up. So I find certain things funny that a lot of people are like, you're still a kid. I'm like, yes, I am. And so, but that excitement as a kid had to learn and discover things, until I take my last breath, there's stuff I'm learning. And I think that when you relay that to other pastors, when you have circuit meetings or whatever, or even to your congregation, hey, man, I just discovered this today. Or I even call it out when people, when younger people, I had to be corrected on what gaslighting was, because I'm like, well, okay. And so they're like, no, this is what it is. I'm like, oh, okay. I said, I still think my definition is better, but that's fine. But learning, what they're doing and I don't have a Snapchat, but I know what it is. There you go. But
that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. I dropped yesterday. I was playing a game with my kids, and I was getting on a roll, and I was like, Dad's beginning to cook right now. And all three of them, they're all in high school. They're like, what did you just say? Well, I heard like Russ, he's a quarterback. Russ is cooking, right? So I'm like, I think the kids say cook today. All that to say we're constantly learning, and Jesus is at the center of it. Let's close coming down the home stretch here on Jesus. Yeah. A very good place to close. How did he care for the mental health of his disciples? And you can even like merge some of those kind of best practices for pastors who care for their own mental health. So let's talk about Jesus and how he cared for his disciples holistically.
So I think the first thing was his presence. When you look at his relationship with his disciples, even I think when he looks at Peter and says, get behind me, Satan, I think there was still this level of trust and care that they had with him just by being there, which indicates a couple of things. It indicates obviously his grace, his patience for them, but also his love of accepting them where they were. I think sometimes we feel like we have to be a certain way for Jesus to accept us or to be happy with us or to even want to hang out with us. I find Jesus actually liking his disciples. We love that Christ loves. I love that. But for me, about a few years ago, I heard this, that Jesus actually likes you. He doesn't just love you. He actually likes you. And I think we see that because he hung out, he laughed, he went to weddings, he spent time with his disciples. And just because he went away to pray wasn't because he was tired of them. And I think that we can get into this mindset that Jesus just came there to teach them. And yeah, he taught a lot, and I'm sure they learned a lot just by hanging out with him, which is real discipleship, by the way. It's not some program. It's not boxes that you check. It's hanging out with people, walking alongside them through thick and thin, watching them be boneheads and still saying, oh, that's awesome. I mean, I try not to laugh at people too much. I try to laugh with them. But the reality is I love you. We're going to fail together. Let's walk this journey together. And Jesus walked with them through the good and through the bad and love them exactly where they were, which really leads to a lot of my work is how do we do that as pastors with our people? Because some of the challenge, right, is that and I won't get into this too much here. It's in my book, but pastors having friends in the congregation is a hot topic. Ooh. Hot topic. Seminaries will tell you. What's that?
I want to hear what you think.
Okay.
Like your stump speech. You don't have to go deep, but give me your stump speech on friends in the church.
Seminaries will tell you not to do it. I will tell you, do it. Now, there's challenges to it. You have to go into that with awareness. The best way that I really relate this, because we struggle with that relationship, because a lot of people say, well, you can't really minister to them. I say, actually, I minister to them better. I know them better. They know the place where I'm coming from. I need a friend. And yeah, it's great if I can find someone outside the church, but I'm really wanting to model connection within the church. And I have guys in the church that share great interests, and I love hanging out with them. And I want them to know me as a pastor and as a person. And so it's one of those things that I think but there is a challenge. We can't go into it and say, oh, I'm going to have the great friend, because you know what? Your friend could disappoint you. But I think we need to have an understanding. The best way to describe it is my wife goes to my church that I'm the pastor of. She's my wife. I'm also her pastor. Is there a tension there? Yeah. I'm not going to be her pastor every single moment that we're at home. Right. So I can be a friend to somebody. And I have another pastor who describes it this way. He goes, I have a good friend, because I'm good friends, but sometimes I'll be like, hey, for this conversation, I'm putting my pastor hat on. Mm-hmm. So they just have this recognition. But I think pastors have spent so many years feeling isolated. And I think some of the reason that pastors move from churches to churches is they get so lonely that they're hoping to regain those moments, that honeymoon moment in the church where everybody wants to have you over and they want to get to know you. And, some of that's agenda driven, which is in my book. But anyway, but it's like, oh, I feel like I'm having friendships again. And so I think that's some of that drives that. And so, yeah, I think that it's important. And so when we look at what pastors can do, and I'm going to answer this question, was going to lead right into it. I think the first thing that we need to do as pastors is pause. Take the time, pause, and breathe. We have convinced ourselves as pastors that we are more important than we really are. And I have another pastor friend who says, pastors are some of the most insecure people that you'll ever meet, because we wrestle with being people pleasers. And the reality is we want everyone to be happy, but the reality is not everyone's going to be happy. That's just the way it goes. So we need to pause. And I say, if you don't take intentional time off, and I'm not the best at this, I'll give you that. But really go, hey, it's okay for me to enjoy my hobby. It's okay for me to go work out. That's another thing with physical health and mental health. They work hand in hand. You really need to look at that. But pause and then reflect. And so I always like to encourage pastors, and you kind of did this already, to go, hey, tell me 2 instances where a church member made you smile this week. And that's usually where I end when I do some coaching with guys and just talk to them about things. That's always how I end. And I'll end some of my podcasts. Tell me how someone made you smile, because we focus so much on that person. So, we had a voters meeting and we passed it, but that one person wasn't really loud in their agreeing. And so they kind of gave the stink eye the whole time. And I'm like, and that's what I focus on, and not the victory of the great voters meeting. And so pause and then be thankful. Just be thankful. I mean, I have to tell you, Tim, there's sometimes I sit there and go, I can't believe that I get to do pastoral ministry as a job. It is such a blessing, and it's just awesome. And then I think a reality check. You're just a person, another sheep in the church of God, and you're not somebody on a pedestal. You put your pants on one leg at a time, all these phrases that we have, and then to celebrate what God is doing, and look for those things that he's doing. And we have to do that. Jesus celebrated, he celebrated when things went well. He went, and I think that we sometimes, back to Peter, he goes, flesh and blood. Well said, Peter. Flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you. He goes, but your Father. So what he's telling Peter is, hey, you're listening. And he can recognize that and call that out. And I think for pastors, it's really important too, to be honest when people do build you up. When they say something that blesses you, tell them that. Go, man, you know what? You really made my day. You really encouraged me. You really made me feel like I'm actually doing my job that I've been called to do. And so thank you for that. Because sometimes we do this. Well, it's really the Lord. And so we give praise to him. Right? Yes, we know that. We know that. But you also, God wants you to know, well done, good and faithful servant, which he speaks over you in Christ. And so we need to know that we need to be encouraged. And it might come from somebody else, but we give credit inwardly. Oh, thank you, Lord, that you're using me.
Hey, Kirk, I just affirm the call that God has placed on your life to bless your congregation and to bless pastors, to speak words of love and care over them. This is a calling that you could say, not to get too charismatic, but an anointing that the Lord has put on you that not many pastors have that. And it's you're playing in spiritual kingdom, spiritual battle warfare type stuff, because when pastors come alive, when pastors say, you know what, I can pause, I can take time off, I want to live a life of gratitude. I heard you didn't use the word, but I'm just one guy. There's a humility that comes. God, if you're going to work, it's got to be about you and your people at work. I'm a small piece of what you're doing, but when you work, man, I will celebrate. And I'll just be grateful when people come up and say, Pastor, you've played a role in bringing Jesus to me. And all I'm going to say is thank you. To God be the glory, to be sure. But this has been so much fun. I wanted to talk more about physical wellness maybe another time. Maybe when I come on with you, we'll talk about the role of taking care of the temple of the Holy Spirit. Love that. And kind of the morning rhythms that taking care of yourself, especially in the morning, to get yourself going. This is not selfish. It's actually selfless, because it allows you to pour yourself more and more into others out of the overflow of what God has given to you. So this has been great. One final word. If you were to say one encouraging word to pastors, just to close, what is, and I love how Luther gives us invitation. You can speak, this is what pastors do, right? We get to speak Jesus words. What does Jesus say over the everyday pastor, just grinding, just trying to make it?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're loved, you're not alone, and we're so excited of what you're doing, and it's not for nothing. You kind of mentioned it. Like I said, we've had these baptisms and they really came out of nowhere. And you sit there and you go, that's God. I can't take any credit for it. You just go, wow. And so I want you to know that there are seasons and that God is with you in those seasons and you're not alone. Paul, when he was praying, he's like, I'm stressed out about, man, it just escapes me what town he was in at the time. But anyway, and the Holy Spirit told him, take heart. You're not alone. And I know best practices, that's one of the things that Pastor Schrank always emphasizes, but you're not alone, and you're not alone in your church. There are people there that God is using that truly love you, and they're praying for you. And so just take heart.
Amen. Amen. If people want to connect with you, Kirk, how can they do so in your podcast?
So several ways. Kirk at ppmhi.org. That's Pastors Positive Mental Health Institute. You can go to ppmhi.org. You can stalk me on Facebook under my name, Kirk Triplett, or Pastors Positive Mental Health Institute. You can find me. I'm not hiding.
Kirk, you're a gift to the body of Christ. It's an honor to call you a friend and have spent the last hour getting to learn with you, and can't wait to join you on your podcast here really, really soon. It's a good day. Go and make it a great day. This is the American Reformation Podcast, and we continue to have guests within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and outside who inspire us to unite in mission to make Jesus known. The days are far too short. And Pastor, we need you. We need you to be well. We need a heart, body, mind, spirit. We need to be connected in community. And we need you to be fired up about the mission of God to get all of his kids back. We'll be back next week on the American Reformation Podcast. Thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.